The agenda.
All right, many thanks, Romeo Busiku, for those updates. Of course, views coming from our viewers. Keep those going, of course, on #morning@NTV. Let's get into the other conversation. Now, the central bank, of course, says that Uganda's economy has dropped and explains this by pointing at the decrease in aggregate demand. Of course, this means the amount of money Ugandans are spending is low. Now, why is this? Now, the Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment, alongside CSBAG and other partners, have organized a dialogue to discuss and find answers to the catalysts that will get Uganda's economy off the ground. So to have that conversation this morning, I'm joined by Mr. George Bogere. He is the Research Fellow at Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment, that's ACORD. Many thanks, sir, and welcome to Morning at NTV. You're welcome. Next to him, I do have Mr. Julius Mukunda. He is the ED of CSBAG. That's the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. Many thanks. Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
I think let me start off. Let's just set the base because I don't know. There's something about 2019 and talks with regards to pushing the economy to the next level. Just the other day, we did have the Minister of Finance, Mr. Matia Kasaja, saying that Uganda's economy is, yes. But many stakeholders are not comfortable with it. We seem to see that we have more potential and we need to tap into our potential. Mr. George, let me let you in on this one. Why this talk? Why do we have yet another economic talk? What is the rationale?
First of all, as many Ugandans will be aware, this is the final year in our NDP2 planning period, 2019-2020. And at the same time, we are getting into a new planning phase for NDP3. So there's a lot of consultation going on. There are a lot of ideas that are being floated around on what we need to do to attain our development targets. But also at the same time, we've had the results that came out of the evaluation of implementation of NDP1 and the midterm evaluation of NDP2. So there's just a lot of information for us to take in.
Right.
But also there are so many platforms for us to engage, and I think that's why it's driving this conversation.
Okay, all right. Mr. Mukunda, you know, I was looking through some of our visions as a country, and one of the critical government visions was to attain middle income status by 2020. In view of NDP 1 and 2, have we lost it? Are we still on course? What's your take?
You see, I've always told you, my fellow Ugandans, that it's good to be very ambitious and to dream big. It's good. We must have hope, dream big, and work on that. But of course, it's also important that you come to it and see how much you can get out of your dream. And it's unfortunate that we have not achieved our 2020 dream of middle income status. I think it's a very big lesson for government and for us as Ugandans. And I think when we are coming here, you are asking, but what's wrong with these economic talks? They're becoming so many.
Right.
I think on a positive note is that now Ugandans are beginning to think that they have a stake on how the economics of this country is being managed. Everybody think that we have a stake to decide on where we should be going, because the challenges to economic development really cannot be solved by one individual, one department of government. That all of us must be there. If take, for example, one of the biggest challenges we have in this country is that we have we cannot implement projects according to the timelines. Why? Because you have issues to deal with the land compensations, you have issues to do with the poor planning, you have issues to deal with probably the project was not designed properly. You can't leave it to one individual. So it's a question now of beginning to ask and say, who is responsible for this particular area? So the issues to deal with demanding accountability comes in. Okay. And now we are saying we don't want to account for processes. I am making the road. No. We want to say, have you made the road? Is it functioning and cars running on it?
Right.
It's not about, oh, I have recruited children in schools, now the enrollment rates are high. No, no, no. We are on how many children have performed well in school. Okay. So those are the kind of conversations now we are having, and I think this is the right moment that as we develop NDP3,
Okay.
We need to be doing that.
I was looking at the theme of this particular conversation, Mr. George, and it says identifying catalysts for economic development, of course, for Uganda.
Yes.
And, you know, we've always said that we know some of these priority areas. Agriculture, tourism comes into play. Different sectors always take the lead when it comes to these conversations.
Yes.
And where our potential is at as the country. But my question to you is, why are we still in a dilemma in terms of implementation and our investment choices? You know, because you seem to see that, you know, in a majority of the conversations, it's about commercializing agriculture. That's our stronghold as a country. But we see little being invested in that area. So why are we still grappling? It's so clear that these are our priorities, these are our strongholds, but when you compare that vis-a-vis investment,
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that development has to be incremental, and therefore sometimes the conditions for takeoff, which the minister referred to when he was saying the economy was, have to be in place. But also there are many changes that happen as you implement development plans. New opportunities emerge. Many years ago, Uganda didn't have oil. Now there's oil. So that means that now the projections you had at the point where you didn't have oil in the equation are going to be different because of that. We are trying to boost our tourism. But even when you want to boost this tourism, the number of other actors that have to come in, you know, into the sector, you have to build their capacity. There are many things that have to happen that cannot happen overnight. That is one. Two, development also is a trial and error game. So there are things that have not worked well, and therefore you have to review periodically. But also, at the same time, while these phrases are catchy and so simple, when we say commercialization of agriculture, modernization of agriculture, it sounds very simple. But what you need to do that is a lot of work, because first of all you need to ensure that you have the right skills, you have the right capacities. We have issues of land tenure, which have dogged this country for many, many years. It's not easy to access that land for commercial agriculture. Many people are into subsistence production. It's also a lot to do with the attitudes. So it's going to take a lot of time, and also it requires that many sectors and actors act in concert so that they can make this happen. And that takes time. Okay.
Mr. Mukunda, whenever we are approaching any budget reading, CS Bank is always there, monitoring government's move and making sure that they're accountable by every bit. Now, my question to you is, we know the priorities, like he said, he mentioned, and unfortunately we're still gambling, like you said. And the critical conversation, especially when we're getting into this current financial year, a majority were expecting, now that a lot of noise was made into agriculture, especially when it comes to mechanizing agriculture, moving from rain-fed agriculture, and making sure that we maximize and grow our export value in terms of agriculture. The budget was read. Top on the list in terms of the sector that got more monies, infrastructure and works and roads.
Yes.
Yes,
and
works
energy.
and transports and energy. So my question to you is government on the right course, or what is it that we're lacking? What ought to have been instead of what we saw and what is currently taking course?
I think government to decide to go for energy and infrastructure was informed by the challenges we were facing then. For example, there is no country in the whole world that has ever developed without enough power and without a good infrastructure. That was done, and we have been joking about it, that now you can transport your potatoes from Mbale to Kampala, or from Bundubujo, or to Kampala, in a day. But I think the fundamental question is that human resource, that investing in the people was not done. And another part is that agriculture. So you were mentioning about that we know the priorities. Why are we not investing in them? And I think that's one of the critical things that we've also been discussing. If you're talking about mechanizing agriculture, can we mechanize agriculture with hose? Because recently you had a news about hose, that we're going to buy hose and give it to farmers.
And we actually borrowed money for that.
And we're going to borrow money. So there are some of the things that you find that we take 3 steps ahead and then we take another step back. And probably I think that's some of the lessons we need to learn, that let us focus on those items that we think can take us forward. And I'm glad that the NDP3, for example, has clearly spelled out that agribusiness is the way to go. We need to go and look at our potatoes and see how we can improve value on them. We need to see how we can see our sugar canes, the things we have as Ugandans. I agree with people say that we need to go to venture into other industries. You know, like let us make phones, let us make pens, let us. It is okay. But there are guys who are 30 years ahead of us. But there are things these guys will never do. They will never produce the kind of beans and peas we do in this country.
Correct.
And that is why I think we need to put our focus on and invest more money on. And I think this is also the theme of this meeting we're having tomorrow. What are those things that can really revamp this economy at a higher speed that one we're currently doing? And some of those are the things that, for example, is we have the people, we have our agriculture. How can we ensure that the 68% who are in subsistence farming can actually engage in the production? And I've always given an example of this fruit factory in Soroti, for example. Let me tell you, every farmer there is beginning to start growing fruits to supply the factory, because now they know they have ready market.
Correct.
Despite the challenges that the factory is having, I mean, you know, did we prepare farmers to grow the right fruits? Do we make sure that we have the market to sell the juice? You know, but those are the kind of things we need to do. So how many factories can we do across the country that can be able to revamp this economy and make the 68% of preparation?
I was also looking to at the other pillars of this conversation. One is that where are we putting our monies? What are some of these priority areas? The other thing, Mr. George, that I was looking at is East African integration. East African integration will be one of the critical conversations you'll be having tomorrow. Now, I was looking through the figures. By the way, Uganda, we are growing. We're not doing so badly off in terms of, we're better. Because when I was looking at the statistics here, we were having a surplus in terms of our exports to our neighboring countries. The only countries that we are still grappling with in terms of we are currently having trade deficits is Burundi and Tanzania, just 2. But the rest, we're having trade surpluses. And just going through the figures coming from the Ministry of Trade and, of course, Economy, they were saying that once we get this right in terms of supporting the local manufacturer, cost of production will be on the way to go. That's my next question to you. Cost of production in Uganda. We're saying we're having surplus electricity, but that has been one of the greatest impediments to our local manufacturers playing in that East African league, whereby when you export your product, it can't compete in the, for example, Kenyan shelf or Tanzanian shelf, because you have to balance out as a business person. If your costs are high, that means that your prices will also be high. So in terms of balancing that out, what should government do? As much as we're trying to also sell our electricity to other markets so we can break even perhaps and make money out of that, what should be our priority in that?
First of all, it's unfortunate that the infrastructure development that we've had has of course reduced the constraints that we've had. For instance, there's a time we didn't have enough power. Factories had to operate at night. Now there's power, but it is very expensive. It's the most expensive in the region. So the question is, how do you bring it down? And we've had some suggestions of how that could happen. Many dams and power plants have come online, but we've not seen that resulting into a reduction in the unit cost of power. And that is a conversation we need to have, because we cannot continue like that. That is one. 2, even the roads that we are constructing right now, they are not resulting necessarily into reduced transport costs. You can get the goods to the market, all right, and they're all-weather roads, but for business, the cost of transport remains high because there's a component of fuel, which depends on foreign exchange rate, and also what happens in the international market.
You see also on transport is that you look at this Kampala congestion, just going through Kampala, it will take you like almost 3 hours. That's another cost on business.
Right. So about competitiveness within the region, I think that this competition between these countries in many ways can be useful, but it can also be detrimental. And my view is that the reason why we need regional integration is so that we can view this region as a zone, a manufacturing zone, where we can use the different raw materials that we have in these different countries and get them to the industries in different parts of these countries, but also be able to share the markets.
Right.
The problem we have right now is that we are all producing the same things. We seem to be competing
Against each other. Right.
So the conversations we need to have with regional integration is how do we bring together synergies so that as a region we can develop this industry.
How possible is that? And I think I'll throw this to Mr. Mukunda. How possible is that dream of regional integration? How feasible is it? Because, you know, when I was looking at some of the regional pillars for the EAC, one of the critical things, number one, common markets.
Yeah.
And that ideally means that we need to break through the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, which is still a great impediment to business. Are we ever going to realize this? The other pillar is customs union. You all know the drama that is in that particular space. Monitoring policy, still we're having gaps here and there. We also have the political union. We're still fighting for sovereignty of the individual states. So how feasible is this dream? And if we're to achieve this dream of one East African unit, like he's saying, instead of competing with each other, how about we realize our own potential, produce special goods for us, and front that to the international market as a unit, as EAC? How possible is that? And if we
I think it's possible. It's possible, really, because even the speed at which we have been integrating is higher than Europe. I mean, if you look at the common markets, I mean, we have really progressed on that very well. If you look at the customs union, I mean, one border post, we are really, you know, that's what we are doing. And IAMU, the East African Monetary Union, it's one that it's sluggish in terms of movement, but I think we have just had a meeting recently, and actually for Uganda we are even doing better than the rest of the other countries. Correct. So it is possible, but leadership matters. Of all of these things, leadership will matter. It is that the political will must be there, that we need to do that. Our issue, for example, our challenges with Rwanda, for example, these are some of the things that shouldn't really be happening in an economic union or in an economic area.
Correct.
These are some of the things that should not be happening. But we have the potential. And by the way, let me tell you, trading amongst ourselves is, for me, I think it is better than trading with Europe and the rest. Because if you look at the conditions being attached on, if you want to export to Europe, first of all, it is very far. If I have my eggs, it is easier to sell them to Kenya. If I have my chicken, it is easier to sell them to Tanzania. But if you have my eggs to transport them to Europe, I mean, it's a very long distance. That's the first basic. But also, I think it protects us from these global wars, for example, that's kind of happening between China and the US. But if you are trading with your neighbor, probably those kind of things will come at a later time than now, than sooner. But I think as countries we need to specialize, like he said. We need to specialize. What is Uganda good at that we can export and sell to our neighboring countries?
Okay.
That's very important. Number two is, what are we good at as East Africans that now we can negotiate for a market in Europe, and we go as a bloc?
All right.
So that collective voice also is very strong now.
So what we are agreeing from your views with regards to that market bit and trade bit in EAC is we need to stop competing. Let's specialize, let's find our fortes and stick to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on to another conversation. And, you know, still looking at the figures, in terms of population growth, in 1960, the population of Hungary compared to, let's start with Uganda, Hungary was at 7 million, and Uganda was about at the same, you know, population at 6.7 million people. In 2019, Hungary is still at 7 million people. Where are we? 40 plus.
What's wrong with their birth rate?
Now, Our population growth rate is substantially growing by the day. We are currently talking of a growth rate of 3.3%. That means for every woman, there's about 5 children.
Yeah.
And the conversation has been our capacity vis-a-vis the growth rate. Are we able to cater to that growth rate? Do you think that is one of the critical impediments to Africa attaining sustainable growth and success economically?
I think that population growth, and you put it very rightly, the question is whether we have the capacity to match the population growth rate. But a huge population is also a big market.
Yeah.
But for the population to translate into a market, you must have a certain quality and caliber of people of that population. It means they must be well educated, they must be healthy, they must have some money, because if you don't have any money, then you cannot consume. Therefore, it's not all bad. However, we cannot continue. Uganda is projected to be around 200 million by 2040 maybe.
Correct.
And yet when you look at the rate at which all these things are happening, the development, it means that the population is going to outstrip the resources and the infrastructure that you have. So at some point we need to have that conversation and take a decision that we need to control our population. One of the things that is expected to do that is if our kids stay longer in school. However, that can also be taken with some pinch of salt. Kenyans stay longer in school than us, but also their population growth. It's not as much as ours, but it's also growing considerably. But the thing is that as African countries, we have to take that decision and be aware that we need to balance our population growth rate with our economic development rates.
If we are to harness our demographic dividend, you said that the big population we have is not all doom. We can still harness it.
Yes.
So it's always been a conversation, harnessing the demographic dividend, but we've never gotten that puzzle right. So what does it take for us to get it right?
You know, with the population, I mean, like he said, it's good when it is of quality. It is a disaster when it is of poor quality. And that's why you see in some countries where there are strikes all the time, there is no food, there is hunger, because the population is not of quality. To harness it, I can tell you, is human capital development. We must have the right healthcare system so that people can be able to work, not to fall sick and they're not working. We must make sure that we upgrade our education system. Skills development in this country is missing. And yesterday we were at a meeting and they were like, skills development is being, skills education is like secondary education. Yet it's supposed to be different.
Correct.
But also is that we need to find employment for our youth. I think the youth barrage in this country, more than 50% of the population is made up of the youth. So we need to find employment for them. And we don't have we don't need to discuss about that we need to find employment for our youth, because once they have employment, then we shall not have the question of the population.
Mr. Mukunda, how do we go about finding employment for these people? Because we know that we are moving from the industrial age and in is the digital age. You've been following through the economics of the private sector, even government alike, especially 2019. I think in the East African bloc, we've really suffered a lot of retrenchments, a lot of layoffs. Businesses are not doing well.
Yeah.
And these are breadwinners. And we still have a big lot of young people who are not employed.
Yes.
So how can we shift our priorities or our ways of doing things to be in line with the digital age, equip, like you're saying, human capital and learning for our young people, for them to be able to find spaces in the future jobs, not the current, brick and mortar kind of tasks that we always engage in. I think you can take that, then we go to Mr. George.
I think the one great magic that you can do these things for me is to ensure that our small scale and medium enterprises will reduce their infant mortality rates. Because these companies, most of them die at the age of 1 year. They are almost dead. But if we're able to create a very good environment for them, two things actually. One is, we talked about it, the cost of power in this country is so high. so you can't start a business. Second is the cost of capital. Interest rates in this country are on the roof.
Correct.
Yesterday we were being told that if you are starting a business and you go to the bank, forget about it. You are dead at the beginning. So can we have affordable capital? Not cheap, by the way. We're not doing cheap capital. Affordable capital. Can we revitalize and invest more in, for example, in our UDB, so that small and medium enterprises can access capital? That is the way we can create employment for these youth and for everybody else.
All right. Mr. George, AI is here. Already there are talks about pushing people, especially in some specific careers that we know, for example, accounting and all these other spaces, where they're being told, guys, you need to retool, reskill, otherwise you'll be rendered redundant. And
the robots are coming.
Exactly. So how do we position ourselves as Africa? Uganda, for example, let's be specific. So we can harness on that digital age that is coming, because as much as it has the negatives of people losing out their jobs, then it also presents, you know, opportunities, amazing opportunities, especially for the young people who are open to the digital age.
Yeah. First of all, that's very important, but let me first go back to the base.
Correct.
What is the base of our economy? It's agriculture, it's going to be industry, it's going to be tourism. Of course, services have taken over as contributing the largest proportion of our GDP. And while the digital age has come, I don't expect that it's going to take over. The digital age can be used to facilitate all these other sectors. For example, a tourist can make reservations online with a hotel or a guest house in Chisoro if they wanted to go to Windi. That is, you know, what the digital age does. But at the end of the day, the service itself is outside of the digital age. It's the experience that they're going to have when they come to visit and all that. So all those things must work in tandem. But about how do we prepare ourselves? We have a lot of talent in ICT. We have many universities and other institutions that are training in these things. What we need to do is to facilitate these people to commercialize some of these ideas, because most of the tenders that the government has that are supposed to be for ICT are tendered out to foreign companies, and they pay a lot of money.
Right.
That means we may not have the capacity to do such things. So how do we bring our ICT people up to speed so that they can compete and they can earn the big money?
Okay, of course, more of this will be tackled tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. Give us the details in 1 minute. Where will this be? How can you plug in? Will it be live and all that? 1 minute, Mr. George.
This is going to be at Protea Hotel between 2:30 and 5:30.
Okay.
It's going to be televised live on NTV, and we have a hashtag Development Strategy. So you can follow on social media as well.
All right. Many thanks, Mr. George Bogere, the research fellow, of course, from Accord, that's the Advocate Coalition for Development and Environment, and also Mr. Julius Mukunda, the ED, Executive Director of Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, what we all know as CSBAG. Many thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We see each other tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
All right. Romeo Busiku, we have so much more. Do let us in on that before we wrap up.
Yes, indeed, Malaki Villa. There is no way we can wrap up this show without giving a major shout out to our beautiful fans who happen to be celebrating their birthdays on this particular Wednesday. Let me start with Kalumba. Paulo Emmanuel, good morning, my early birds. Love waking up with you each and every day. It's my base birthday. Proceed. May she live to blow and more candles. Cherish you, please. And we cherish you to Kaluma right there for having a special heart right there. Now, Venancio, you're saying it's my birthday, so happy birthday to me. Yes, a very great happy birthday to you, Mr. Venancio. Abias Ayesiga, once for Karuma, birthday man of today. Yes, indeed. Well, those are some of the comments right here on our Facebook. Beautiful people celebrating their birthdays on this particular Wednesday.
Right, many thanks, Romeo Busiku, for that. We have to say goodbye and pave way for BBC Money Daily. Exactly. My name is Malaki Vilodara. Many thanks for allowing us into your lives every single Monday to Friday, 6:30 to this point in time. So go out and make it work. See you tomorrow. This is Morning at NTV. Romeo.